This special edition of Global Lens, US President Donald Trump has announced 25% tariffs on India. The new rate is modestly lower than the 26% he announced in April. In a social media post, Trump said that India's tariffs are among the highest in the world and referred to them as the most strenuous and obnoxious non-monetary tariff barriers. That he will also impose a penalty on India for buying military equipment as well as oil from Russia. In a separate post, Trump wrote that US has a massive trade deficit with India. The US had been seeking zero tariffs from India in a trade deal that would have been similar to the one secured by Japan and Vietnam. Here's why India-US trade ties are crucial. As per government data, the US remained India's largest trading partner for the fourth consecutive year in FY25. Bilateral trade was valued at $131.8 billion. India's exports to America jumped by 11.6% from the previous fiscal year. Imports from America surged 7.4%. India recorded a trade surplus of over $41 billion during the period. To discuss what the tariffs will mean for India, joining us on the show is William Reinsch, Senior Advisor and Scholl Chair in International Business at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Atul Kesha, President, USIBC, is also with us. And Leah Fahy, Chief Economist, Capital Economics, is also with us on the program. Ambassador Kesha, let me begin by asking you, this seems to be quite a setback. Till this evening, we were coming around to the fact that there will be a 20% or a 25% tariff on India. But now a penalty, and how much could that be? How do you see this move by the Trump administration?
Well, Parikshit, thanks for having me on the show. I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles, where we just had our 50th anniversary USIBC Jubilee dinner. And let me tell you, there's a lot of affection for India all around the United States, a lot of support for what India represents in world affairs. And that includes a very healthy part of the business community. So we have consistently been calling for this deal to be done. The president's tweet speaks for itself. There's obviously some impatience there, but I would say that both sides need to be dispassionate, step back, and figure out how to work a deal. You know, the U.S. market, and you mentioned all of the trade figures, is absolutely critical to all kinds of small and medium-sized enterprises all around India. In Surat, in Vadodara, in Bengaluru, everywhere around India, people tap into the American market to export to the United States. And I would say something rather basic, but rather important. We are better off together. The EU, the Japanese, the Indonesians, the Vietnamese, the UK, and so many others have concluded agreements with the United States because they recognize the importance of American FDI, American market, American know-how, American technology. And I think this is also true for India. And so my appeal, my respectful appeal, would be for both governments to come to an agreement. There's obviously some impatience right now, but we are vastly better off together. And frankly, it would impact many Indian exporters negatively as a result of these tariffs. So we need to come to a deal.
Right. Let me also get across to William Reinsch. William Reinsch, what do you think? For the last few weeks, we felt that talks between India were moving positively, even though there had been no breakthrough as such. But look at the kind of language that Donald Trump has used for India. Very high tariffs, obnoxious non-tariff barriers. You're a buyer of Russian oil and Russian military equipment, and therefore you need to get a penalty. India is one of the closest strategic allies of the United States. What do you think has prompted Donald Trump to use this kind of words for India?
Well, it's a classic tactic, and he does this all the time. And I think it's at least in part a negotiating tactic. His standard approach, if he's not getting what he wants, is to push harder. I mean, it's a bullying tactic, and that's what he's done with respect to other countries too. He called out the European Union back in May for not negotiating seriously enough. You've seen what his dialogue with China had some similarities. If he thinks the negotiations are not moving fast enough or not moving in his direction, he attacks. And so this is an attack. I think Secretary Bessent commented with respect to the same tactics with a different country that says, this is negotiating. This is the way we do it. So the idea, I think, is to push India harder. Whether India will allow itself to be pushed harder, we'll have to wait and see. The deadline is in 2 days. So there's not a lot of time to try to forestall the tariff, although Trump has made clear that, even if the tariff, the 25% goes into effect, there's still time to talk. And if there's a deal, then it'll go away. So I think, it's still, everything's still on the table. I think the Indian government needs to decide, how accommodating it wants to be. And if you look at their neighbors, at least to the east in Southeast Asia, most of them have landed in the approximately 20% zone. The Europeans seem to be at 15, the British at 10. I think if I were the Indian government, I'd be worried about 25, not just because it will disadvantage Indian producers on its face, but because it will disadvantage them vis-a-vis their competitors in Southeast Asia, who will have a better deal.
Right. William Reinsch, from your experience, could you probably give us a sense of what could the penalty be? We don't know as of now because Donald Trump has said that India will get 25%, plus there will be a penalty.
Yes, the penalty is a new element that hadn't been there before. And that's worrisome because it's, it's a political problem, not an economic problem. He's objecting to Indian purchase of Russian oil because he wants to squeeze the Russians on Ukraine. And that's not really, it's not really about economics. It's not like our oil industry is suffering because of this. And I'm not quite sure yet how to deal with it. He's doing the same thing to Brazil on not related to Russian oil, but related to this, their litigation regarding the Lula's predecessor. It's very hard to predict what happens when politics is injected into an economic debate. The normal issues are not on the table. I'm not sure what the Indian government could do to address that problem, aside from saying they're not going to buy any more oil. As for the rest of it, I think the negotiations just have to continue. If you look at the deals that have already been cut, countries have been able to obtain a better number than they started out with. So India ought to be able to get to 20 or 15, which would at least make them, in the same neighborhood as their immediate competitors. The way to do that, I think, is with purchase agreements, investment agreements. Indian investment in the United States is growing. I think it could grow more.
Right.
Commitment to produce more here. And I think inevitably Trump will demand concessions on specific sectors. I would look at, if I were the Indian government, I'd look at the digital sector. I would look at American services and letting more of them in. I would address irritants like the big box store issue and things like that. Trump will demand concessions in agriculture. That's probably a bridge too far for the Indian government, would be my guess.
All right. All right. William, I'll come back to you. Those are some important points. You're saying that U.S. is seeking investment commitments from India. Let me go across to Leah at this point. Leah, when it comes to other economies in the region, do you feel these tariffs of 25% plus a penalty will now put India in a disadvantage in the region?
Yeah, it definitely diminishes the attractiveness of India as kind of a manufacturing hub, which it had been kind of looking to benefit from, especially with Trump's even higher tariffs on China. That said, when you compare India to the rest of the region, a lot of his neighbors have tariffs rates in the region of around 20%. And that's not that substantial difference when it comes down to it. India also benefits from having very cheap labor costs, a big labor supply as well. So when you're thinking from the perspective of investors that are looking to shift away from China and into other economies in the region, I think India still looks relatively attractive. That said, I mean, I think investors had been looking to India with the view that it was a much more secure investment given its good relations with the US. So this will definitely come as a blow. But I think we should be seeing this 25% tariff rate as kind of a starting point for negotiation rather than necessarily where tariff rates on India are going to end up.
Right. The White House economic advisor has just spoken. He said that Trump and Greer will have more information on additional penalty shortly. Trump thinks tariff will help the situation. And Ambassador Keshav, I'm coming to you. Hassett has also mentioned that Trump is frustrated with the progress with the India-US deal, and a deal with India will be an absolute game changer. And he's hopeful that the India market will open up for the United States. What is the source of frustration, according to you, right now? What's Donald Trump really seeking?
Parikshit, India was the first mover, if you recall. And Secretary Bessent said many weeks ago that India was #1 in the gates to get a trade deal done. And yet now so many others have gone ahead with trade deals with the United States, but the India deal is still lagging. We've heard that negotiations were concluded as much as a month ago. And so there is now a question of why there hasn't been closure. I think it would be damaging psychologically for business confidence if we don't have a deal. I think it would be damaging for strategic equations as well, given that India has, such a difficult neighborhood in which it exists. We need to have these deals, and we need to make sure they are public in order for the entire world to feel confident. It is a question for me why we have been lingering for a month without closing this thing. And I think you can definitely see the frustration in the president's messaging. Look, at the end of the day, nations have to make sovereign decisions. The U.S. has made sovereign decisions. India has every right to respond in any way it sees fit. But I keep going back to this point. The U.S. and India need each other. We are better off with each other. And the message we ought to be sending together is that we are going to work to enhance our strategic, economic, and technological position vis-a-vis our strategic competitors. And we face the same strategic competitors. If we don't work out a deal, it's going to be really bad for India's small and medium exporters who need the American market and have had great access to the American market. And the president has a point about tariffs and non-tariff barriers. To the extent that we can get through to a deal where we've actually gotten to near zero on a wide variety of tariff lines, and that we have sent that message of psychological confidence that is so critical to the investor communities, then that is a good thing. In the absence of a deal, that message is not sent. People think twice. They wonder about whether they should be investing in India for manufacturing or other key technologies. So this is important. It's got to get done, and I hope it gets done soon, because as I said, it's been basically lingering for a month since the negotiations were concluded.
We have been reducing our oil purchases, military purchases from Russia. The purchases from US for energy have gone up. Vikram Misri in February had said that $25 billion worth of energy will be purchased from the United States. What does Donald Trump really want India to do vis-a-vis Russia, according to you, Ambassador Keshav?
Well, look, I mean, way back in November, December, we were having conversations about how India can very greatly shape its standing with the United States in some very easy ways that have been discussed widely, one of which is energy purchases, the other is defense purchases, and the third is agricultural purchases. There's been a lot of talk about this, but none of it has actually happened. And to the other speaker's point, this is all part of a negotiation. So some countries took the tactic of actually making big commitments in public. India has not done that. India, of course, is a democracy. Its politicians are accountable to the people. We respect that. We understand that. America is the same way. So this is a little more complicated when India and the United States negotiate with each other, because they have to consider many, many things, including public reaction. But in the very dangerous and turbulent world that we inhabit, the United States and India really do have to get their act together and get this deal done. It cannot keep lingering. It sends a signal to our shared adversaries that's unhelpful, and it sends a signal to the business community that's unhelpful.
Right.
So again, my strong encouragement: get it done.
Okay.
Pick up the phone, close the deal, get it done.
Right. William, do you believe, because India will also consider the option of retaliating, should that be considered, or that will further instigate Donald Trump and things could get worse thereon?
Well, it would increase the drama, and he almost always reacts negatively to retaliation threats. In fact, with most of the threats he's made, he said that, if there is retaliation, then he'll simply increase the tariffs. I think it's noteworthy so far that very few countries have retaliated. China has, and you saw what that produced, kind of a yo-yo effect in our policy. Tariffs were up, they were down, they were on, they were off. Now they've settled at higher rates than before all this began. The Canadians have retaliated on steel, and that's about it. The EU made a lot of threats to retaliate and prepared a list of items that they were going to attach tariffs to, and then they ultimately did not do that. And smaller economies have not done that. The president's view has been basically that it may be different from what was just said, which is that access to the American market is so important that other countries will pay for it, and that they should pay for it. And his view of these negotiations has been consistently that the other countries need to make all the concessions, and that the U.S. concession will only be not to impose the threatened tariff. It's not worked out that way. I mean, if you look at some of the agreements, like the one with the UK, the US did make some concessions, but for the most part, going into the negotiations, he's expecting the other country to do all the surrendering, and the US just to pocket all these things. So I think that, we're in the, where the other speakers are quite right. We're in the negotiation phase.
All right, we're going to take a short break. I'll request all our speakers to stay with us. I'll be going back to Leah, but I'll request William and Atul Keshav to continue being with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Global Lens. We continue the discussion with William Reinsch, Atul Keshav and Leah Fahi. Leah, let me come back to you. How would you describe the trade negotiations that have taken place with China, with the truce continuing on the tariffs? In India's case, the negotiations are positive. We are very close allies, but Donald Trump has gone ahead and penalized India. So how would you compare these two negotiations, and do you see this as a case where Donald Trump believes India does not have leverage?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had 2 days of negotiations in Stockholm between the US and China, and the outcome so far has been very little. So as you've said, there's been an extension of the tariff truce that was supposed to end on the 12th of August for another 90 days, although the two sides can't even seem to agree that much because China has said that that extension has been agreed, whereas according to the US, President Trump has the final say, and he'll decide on that at some point today. And I think the more interesting point is, there's been a lot of tensions between China and the US, both in terms of its bilateral trade surplus and deficits, but also this rare earths issue, Chinese purchases of Russian oil, which is also something that India has been called up on. And yet, kind of despite all of these issues, we've had these trade negotiations, and the US hasn't really managed to call China up on any of those issues and get to any sort of agreements that it might have been looking for. Instead, we've kind of had an extension of the status quo, tariffs remaining at the level that they are, and kind of all these issues being pushed forward to some later date. So I guess, yeah, in some senses, it does show that, that Trump doesn't always have the upper hand.
Right. Let me go back to Ambassador Atul Keshav. Ambassador Keshav, where do you think India now needs to give in? Agriculture and dairy, we are literally saying, and this is what we hear from people who are privy to negotiations, that agriculture and dairy cannot even be a part of the negotiating room. We can discuss everything else. It cannot be that US imposes 20% on us and we give you zero tariffs in return. What do you think, and where do you think India should compromise now?
So my understanding from the negotiations is that the U.S. negotiators have actually been very respectful of India's perspectives on the agriculture and dairy, that the negotiation has actually been very substantive, that some very important concessions have been made by both sides, that there is actually the contours of a very useful deal that will greatly boost trade and investment and business and open up each other's markets further for greater prosperity and greater consumer choice. I think at this point, what we need to do is see both leaders close the deal. It would be good for both countries. Talk of retaliation, I think, is really not helpful or productive. What we need to do is just finish the work that's been done. Both governments have been very diligent for the past few months. India did have the prime mover advantage. It has worked well, and the U.S. has worked well with India behind closed doors, which is as it should be. And now we're at the point where this thing needs to be finished. And if it is finished, I think it'll send a very great signal to the business community. We can then work on the other difficult issues. But I think there's been a lot of respect for each other and each other's positions. And there's much else we can do together. I mean, look at NISAR, the launch today of the NISAR satellite, the Axiom launch. The US and India get a lot of great things done. And if we can conclude this particular negotiation, it will lead to other negotiations that will dynamize our economies even more. We do face dire strategic competition and challenges. We do need to work together. It is time to get this thing done.
William Reinsch, my final question to you. What do you think will be the deal clincher? We hear from former trade negotiators in the US that he wants a big headline deal. He wants hundreds of billions of dollars in investment commitments. How would India do that? How would any country make investment commitments to that extent?
Well, the dirty little secret of all these is that it's very easy to make the commitments. A lot of them don't get delivered. I mean, and there's a long history of this. It precedes Trump. There are many very large investment announcements that are made with great fanfare that never end up happening, or never end up happening to the extent that is promised in the beginning. How is the EU going to buy $750 billion worth of U.S. energy, which is what roughly triple what they're buying right now? There's doubt whether we can even export that much if they were willing to buy it. How can they commit to $600 billion in investment in the U.S. when in the EU those are commitments that can only be made by the private companies that are going to do it? It's not $600 billion of EU money. The Indian government can make. I don't want to suggest anybody lie about it, but basically, there's been a lot of promises made in a lot of these deals that simply are not going to end up happening. I don't see why India is going to be any different. See what your companies are willing to do, make some credible commitments, see what happens. There are big, important companies in India that are multinational, that are already invested here. Ask them if they can do more. I should add, there are other issues. I would take a look at the Indonesian agreement and see what the Indonesians agreed to. One point that I want to emphasize, because it's an issue for India as well, is the Indonesians agreed to support the continuing moratorium on internet taxation and e-commerce taxation. India has been the obstacle to that for years in the World Trade Organization. I really hope that one of the U.S. demands is that the Indians agree to alter their position on that as well.
Right. Those are all important points. And, a couple of things which I saw Scott Bessent being asked is a lot of these agreements, you've not seen the text so far. The Japanese economists have questioned these investment commitments, saying that they're not binding in any way. These are just you're playing to the political demands of Donald Trump. Possibly, India could also pick up some of these cues from the negotiations that have taken place with other countries. But thank you very much, Atul Keshav, Leah Fahy, and William Reinsch for joining us on the program. This is indeed breaking news, a blow to India. But let's see what happens in the next few hours and days.